I've got bad news. Actually, not facetiously. Did you know that Hollywood working conditions are atrocious even when the movie they make is really good? I know there were a lot of people who seemed to be under the impression that just because Spider-Verse was an extremely good movie, and it is, that would mean that they are somehow free from the incredibly low standards for VFX work. No, that is not how it works. Do not spoil. I'm not spoiling. We're not spoiling. I'm not spoiling. We're talking about the production. Chill. This is a big expose, by the way. Woohoo! Yeah. Okay. Oh, God, I feel sick today. Well, you know what? So do the people who worked in this movie. For animated movies, the majority of the trial and error process happens during writing and storyboarding. Now, sorry, the abuse of VFX workers is a canon event. Holding Miles back, the like 300 dudes in a sweaty office in Anaheim. It's obviously very expensive having to redo the same shot several times over, having every department touch it so many times. The changes in the writing would go through storyboarding, then it gets to layout, then animation, then final layout, which is adjusting cameras and the placement of things in the environment. Then there's cloth and hair effects, which have to repeatedly be redone anytime there's an animation change. The effects department also passes over the characters with ink lines and does all the crazy stuff like explosions, smoke, and water. And they work closely with lighting and compositing on all the color and visual treatments in this movie. Every pass is plugged into editing, smaller changes tend to start with animation, and big story changes can involve more departments like visual development, modeling, rigging, and texture painting. These are a lot of artists affected by one change. Imagine an endless stream of them. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about art, VFX workers. My dad is a VFX worker, and they don't have a union, and it shows in the kinds of work that they do. And by kinds of work that they do, I mean brutal work. The problem here is that making movies is incredibly labor intensive, massively so. And one of the ways that studios will try to shorten the overall production time, the whole through line for making a movie, is you have the VFX workers start as early as possible. And that makes sense, right? I mean, even if you go back to the very beginning of movies, oftentimes you'd have people like set designers or matte painters, the people who paint like big backgrounds that they would put in the background. It's like, oh yeah, there's the big there's the big vista of Mars or whatever. And it's like, well, somebody painted that, you know? But they painted that like well before the shooting began, you know? The goal is, if you want to get things done through as quickly as possible, you want everyone to start as early as they can, right? You don't want people to be sitting on their asses when potentially time could be saved in the long run. The problem is that in modern movies where VFX is everywhere, or in movies like Across the Spiderverse where it's literally a 3D movie, like the whole movie is VFX, any change made at any point means that there will have to be like innumerable VFX changes down the line, like this gigantic, like Rube Goldberg machine of processes and development and redevelopment gets set in motion again and again, which means that like every time there's a minute change, even if the change is well-intentioned or good or artistically justifiable, it means like, imagine being a guy whose job it is to like touch up some 3D work, and every day you go back in doing and undoing previous work because the like area that you're working on is subject to constant review, you know? So like a lot of the work you're doing is not in the final product. A lot of the work that you're doing is at the end of things, like when everything is said, done, and accounted for, non-work. It does not in any way reflect on the final product. It's not there. It's not completed. I think that a good example of how bad this has gotten would be like if you took a look at the work matte painters used to do or set designers. Did they throw out work sometimes? Sure. But imagine if a set designer, for every one set they completed that got shown in the final product, like 8 sets were rotting somewhere in a Hollywood dungeon. You know what I mean? Or like for every matte painting that made its way to the final edit of the film, there were like just a pile of giant finished paintings that were just sitting in a warehouse somewhere, you know? That can happen though. It can, but that's not the norm. Except for in VFX work, where it is the norm because that happens. And what's more, because there's no physicality to it, there's no physical archive, if that makes any sense, you know? Discarded matte paintings, at least there's some physical remnant of your work. But when it's like the constant redoing of work on a single scene over and over, those previous iterations are kind of lost to the ether. It's not like you get to keep the tiny little digital edits you made, these little piecemeal components of a broader design, you know? So it's just work. It's work and work and work and work and work. And hey, I mean, over 100 people left the project because they couldn't take it anymore. But a lot stayed on just so they could make sure their work survived until the end. Because if it gets changed, it's no longer yours. See, there's no longer even any persistence or longevity. Because it's not like a physical thing. Like, if you leave, if you're done, if your work gets done over, then you've been overwritten. Your participation in the process is now limited to you helped rough out stuff before it got done. And that's it, no matter how much work you actually did. VFX workers need a union, and I think one of the easiest things that could be done to help mitigate this immense suffering would probably be to have VFX leads be more closely in touch with the writing and development team, so it's less likely that work gets wasted. Let people who are experts in VFX work be present when the stuff gets revised and touched on, so it can be like, okay, do we need to redo work on this specific thing, or is this basically guaranteed to be changed in the future? Do we need to do this work, or is it so up in the air that we could like postpone doing work on this scene by 2 weeks while waiting to see if other stuff works out? That kind of stuff, you know? There is something that could be done here. There are ways to improve this, but it involves like keeping VFX leads in the process when generally they're treated like disposable workers. Kind of like what we do with fill-in animators, you know? Like everyone knows key animators for, say, animation or anime or whatever, where they'll do like the big shots that like everyone else works around. But then there's like thousands of Korean people in a studio somewhere that are just filling the drawings in between keyframes, and nobody knows their names. Why haven't they formed the union already? That's a great question, because the VFX departments that we know and love today were formed after Reagan's presidency, meaning that the general workplace culture and attitude of a bunch of like tech bros who had no formal education in their work but suddenly struck gold by being able to do highly specific technical work without any kind of like official or like academic training was they were all libertarians. Seriously, think about it. It's the 1980s. There's no school for VFX, but people who have like a basic understanding of computer functionality or like history and animation or rotoscoping or whatever suddenly break into this new exciting industry. Jurassic Park, you know, the Terminator 2, you know, Back to the Future. Wow! All these crazy films, and they're all tech dudes, and they all have long hair and big beards, and they're all now doing pretty well for themselves because their movies are making money. They're libertarians. They're libertarians. VFX goes back earlier than Reagan. I'm talking about the general culture of the industry. Compared to VFX workers, people who are working makeup, people who are working sound, people who are working lighting, they're like French workers. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you want the boom mic left out of the shot? You think it sits too low in the scene? Looks like it's time for my 4-hour lunch break. We'll see when I come back. And then compared to them, like the VFX workers are like, yeah, I'm on top of my game. I'm a human machine. 7-day week, 8-day week, yeah. Meld your mind, you know, the workplace culture is completely different, and it f***ed over the VFX workers, and now everyone else has a f***ing union and they don't, okay? I'm only slightly exaggerating. I hope you all understand. They were all like the early grind set dudes. Okay, hypers in chat if you've worked in Hollywood and you understand that what I'm saying is correct, because I feel like I sound insane, but what I'm saying is definitely completely accurate, okay? Okay, listen, there are at least some hypers in chat. I'm right. I'm right. Accurate for game dev too. 100% accurate for game dev. 100%, yeah. I know people who were on the project for over a year who left, and now they have little to show for it because everything was changed. They went through the hell of the production and got none of their work coming out the other side. Oh, this doesn't even look good on a CV because it's like, oh, I worked on Spiderverse. Oh, really? Can you show us some of the like shots that you worked on? The majority of the crew were sitting idle for half a year because Phil was holding up sequences and layout. That's a lot of money. These people are sitting there getting paid to do nothing. Because we hired a massive team of artists to accomplish the October date, then we found it was pushed. The water behind the dam kept growing because Phil was holding off sequences. Then at a certain point, we ran out of time. The dam broke, water came flood again. All the departments were swamped doing overtime. See, this is like a classic case of mismanagement. Things just kept getting changed and cut and redone over and over again, even though shots were getting pushed through all the departments. The whole experience felt like one step forward, two steps back, until we were forced to sprint to make up ground in the last few months. There are sequences we started in 2021 that we just finished in May. That is a lot of artist hours and time and energy and stress. This production has been death by 1,000 paper cuts. The whole thing is worth a look, by the way. I was looking at it on my phone while I was in the shower before starting stream because it just came out. It's not good. Something like 90% of the shots in the trailer are not in the movie. You've probably noticed that. You use your phone in the shower? Yeah, obviously. What, you think just because you're showering, your brain can't grow? Come on, guys. What happened to always on your grind? Did you see the child labor they employed? Yes, I am familiar with the fact that the Lego sequence was animated by a 14-year-old Lego animation prodigy. I think that's lovely. This kid has their career set ahead of them. They're the coolest kid in school. They got to go back to school the day after the movie released, and everyone was like, "Dude, yeah, 100%, super cool." I wouldn't really refer to this as child labor because it's not typically what we mean when we refer to child labor. I think it's pretty cool personally, but whatever. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Hollywood is a bad scene, man. It's just a difficult environment for good work. Are child actors child labor? See, technically, yes, but that's obviously not what people mean. Why isn't this child labor? Because typically when people say child labor, what they mean is like, low skill or unskilled labor that children are forced into as a way of artificially deflating the price of labor in a given field. Like sweatshops or having them get thrown into coal mines or whatever. Not like a child does a scene in a movie where they play a kid or something. It usually, there's an association with like negativity of exploitation that's not really present when it comes to animating a Lego scene. What about your dad? He didn't become a libertarian, but he was in VFX. My dad has been pushing for a VFX union for his entire life. He was doing it back in the late 80s. He's been doing it through the 90s, the aughts, he's been doing it his entire time. I literally remember him like bringing friends in the industry home to have drinks sometimes, and he would talk about the need to unionize. He still talks about it on Twitter.